So I'm Dan Runde. I'm a Senior Vice President at the Center for Strategic International Studies. It's a think tank in Washington. It's not CSI Miami, so we're just clear about that. But we're having a panel discussion today about unblocking FDI and private sector development, when and how. So my goal at the end of this is that we take 1, 2, or 3 big ideas out of this panel that you take away from this discussion. And so our goal, there were several meta questions that were asked in the agenda. What are the bottlenecks for private sector engagement? What could be a game changer for significant inflow of capital? Is there space for impact investors? Where? How can companies, philanthropists, and civil society work together? So we've been running a year-long commission on reconstruction at CSIS. We've brought Ukrainians together, Europeans together. Sir Robin Niblett, the former head of Chatham House, is on our commission. We've done 25 seminars in different dimensions of reconstruction and done 15 papers on different dimensions of this. And so we've been really privileged to work with many of you in this audience. My deepest thought from all of that work is that we need to align all of the reconstruction of Ukraine with EU accession. That's my deepest thought after hundreds of meetings and papers and seminars. That's my deepest thought. Okay. The vision in my mind, like what does victory look like after all those conversations? It looks like this. Ukraine has the manufacturing heft of Germany. Ukraine has the tech strength of Silicon Valley. Ukraine has the agricultural potential of Canada. Ukraine has the defense industrial base of Israel, so nobody ever messes with it ever again. Fully a member of the European Union, and so my friends in the European Union, my message to you is begin the real conversation now. There's like the save the date stuff, and then there's the invitation thing. There's like, I know I'm an American, right? I'm not supposed to know about this stuff because you guys, it's complicated, it's Europe, I'm not supposed to know. But I know there's like a save the date, and then there's the real conversation. We have not begun the real conversation yet. So this requires political will. My strong hope is that Spain's European Union presidency will begin the process of negotiations for real. I know there's 7 buckets of stuff and there's been progress and blah, blah. Begin the process. That's my deepest thought. Okay. The second thing is we're going to need for Ukraine some kind of a security arrangement. It's either going to be NATO, I'd be in favor of that, or something that looks like the U.S. relationship with Israel. We don't have a treaty engagement with Israel, but we basically give Israel access to all the good stuff. That's going to require some things. It's probably also going to require getting rid of Huawei as a tech backbone for the telecom system in Ukraine. And I'm on Team Ukraine, right? So I love Ukraine, but I think we need to have an honest conversation with our friends in Ukraine. Like, that system needs to be pulled out of the ground and burned. That needs to go away. Okay, so with those introductory comments, I want to begin this session. We have some really smart people I like, people I admire, people I would consider heroes, who I think are going to be on this panel. They're going to help us kind of unpack some of these issues. First, we have Deputy Minister Gryban, who's the Deputy Minister of the Economy of Ukraine. We have my friend Mike Stenson, who's Group Head of Innovation for Kingspan. Kingspan is a particular hero during this moment. They are investing hundreds of millions of euros in Ukraine right now during the war. And they are someone that we can learn from, and so it's really important to hear from Mike Stenson and from Kingspan right now. Then my friend Natalie Jaresko, who's a managing partner at EY Parthenon, but that's not really who everyone knows who she is. She's the former finance minister. She's the former CEO of Rising Capital. She's a hero for our time and someone I really admire. I'm thrilled that she's on this panel. And then we have Mr. John Patton, who's an Argentem Creek Partners, who's an investor and a longtime investor in Ukraine. So let me start with the Deputy Minister. Deputy Minister Gryban, what are some of the things your government is doing to unblock investment in Ukraine right now?
Well, obviously, attracting investments in these challenging times is not an easy task. So, we try to distinguish first what are the road bricks on the way of making it happen. Obviously, the war risks are the major issues that concern everybody, and trying to cure this and handle this issue, the government has started active engagement with with numerous multilateral and development financing institutions at the summer last year. We started the dialogue first with MEGA. They were the most obvious vendors for this. When we started talking to them, they were in position not to consider Ukraine to the full scale of ensuring the investment risk. They were more in the trade facilitation investment. But then we kind of gradually managed to bring them to the idea that they needed and that we needed, that this is actually the win-win situation. And that was the trend that allowed us to move in and block some of the other initiatives. Now we have MEGA, and we see MEGA is going to announce probably, I'm going to do some teaser, they're going to announce a couple of deals they're going to insure on the URC, and they found cooperation with another DFI, DFC, that is actually a slightly different approach, because MEGA is essentially insuring only international investors, although they're moving there as well. They're going to soon insure the Ukrainian investors, which is essential for us, is crucial, because when you have a JV partner from Ukraine that is not insured, and then the JV partner from abroad that is insured, there's a little unfair game. So this is being handled. DFC is actually ready to insure both Ukrainian, American, Irish, whatever, like the Swedish, any investors who have it in mind. Then we see a number of ECAs who we also work closely with that they're also ensuring the war risk. So we started the snowball rolling. This is the major stuff that we consider to be our achievement. Now we see the initiatives similar, like EBRD is trying to set up a separate trust fund where they want to raise funds to ensure the trade facilitation and to unblock the private insurance, the private reinsurance market. You know, like the huge giants like Aon, Munich Re, Swiss Re, Lloyd's. They are still in a sleeping mode a little bit, but we want to wake
give them a cup of coffee.
Cup of coffee and the wake up call, yeah. So and it looks like they're gonna unblock their limits fairly soon. So basically, we're on the cutting edge of unblocking the limits for Ukraine. We're on the cutting edge of explaining all this government-related, multilateral, and international finance institutions that they need to be a little risk-averse in these situations, because everybody needs to put their own portion and input to the Ukraine's victory. If the guys on the battlefront, you know, like giving their lives, the people in the government are giving their like time and sleepless nights for that. So we're really asking for our partners to unblock and to be a little bit less risk-averse. So they need to do inputs. And actually, the good example is Denmark, actually. So recently, Denmark have set up the investment fund based on their export credit agency, based on EKF. Now it's called AFO. And AFO is similar to DFC's approach. So they not only issuing the credit risk guarantees, but also do the direct lending. And they gave the first loans to the companies from agricultural sector on the south of Ukraine, from Kherson and Mykolaiv, AgriFusion and Nibulon. You know all the story about Nibulon. They had a great UBO who was killed by Russian missile. And obviously, like, you cannot apply the regular approach to them.
They had to move their business.
Yeah, they had to move their business, and partially then they are not part of the grain deal initiative because their seaport is in Mykolaiv. So their EBITDA in 2022 was nothing to look at, right? And if you apply just a regular approach to them and say, okay, give me your EBITDA, I'll tell you, so 3x loan to EBITDA is your loan. The Danes said, we don't care. We're gonna look at their financials of 2021, and they did the same with AgriFusion, whose factory for producing the tomato paste was bombed.
So they were creative. They were willing to kind of think outside the box. They had a cup of coffee. They kind of woke up a little bit and said, we're going to try and help Ukraine, and we see the potential for Ukraine.
Exactly. And that's what we actually encourage all the others to do. And now you also know that the inflation rates are just skyrocketing, and so that's why the reference rate and the interest rate for the financing are also pretty high. And again, Danes are creative. They are giving more grants. So if you give like up to 40% of the grant component, means essentially you're going to decrease your interest rate. So more creative approaches and things like this.
Deputy Minister, could I just ask you, like, could you make a case to this audience, like, what is, I made an earlier case as to why I think Ukraine is a great, make the simple case for folks who may not be in the business community. Some folks are policymakers, some folks may have never invested in Ukraine. What's the business case to invest in Ukraine now?
Consider, like, let's try to do it a little plain vanilla. Let's take a site on the western Ukraine, because for somebody it's simpler just to take a decision to do this. It's closer to the western border. Take the site in the industrial park. Because having the site in the industrial park, you're going to have the government incentives. If you're a registered industrial park and you're the resident of the industrial park, first you can get utilities financed by the municipalities. This was recently deblocked by the government. Then you can get up to 30% of your capex compensated in taxes that you will not pay. So you will not pay import VAT, you will not pay customs duty, bringing the equipment to Ukraine. Become export-oriented, become focused on the generation of the foreign currency, get to the markets like EU, because we have the trade facilitation agreement with the EU, a number of other countries, by the way. It's like you're going to track this. So like they're becoming more and more accessible with less customs duties. And so this is the case where you get the skilled labor from Ukraine that you already have. Get the relatively cheap electricity from Ukraine.
And have access to the European Union market.
And have access to the European Union market. So that's your business case.
That's the great business case. So this is great. Thank you, Deputy Minister. That's great. So Mike, you represent Kingspan. Now, if I understand correctly, Kingspan manufactures building materials. And you are all over the world. And you had a choice of investing in any number of different places, but in Eastern Europe, but you chose to invest in Ukraine. Why did Kingspan decide to invest in Ukraine, and why did they do so now?
Okay, so you said we've many locations in lots of places in the world with a big business presence in Eastern Europe. And we were faced, or have been faced, with a challenge in terms of how do we increase the capacity for that business in Eastern Europe. And we looked at a couple of locations as to where we should make that investment. And it boiled down to, the likes of Poland, Slovakia, etc. And we're in many of those countries today. And we took a view on Ukraine that in anticipation of a better future there post-war, that this would be the right place to locate for a combination of the ability to export back in and service those markets where we're already present today, and also to basically participate in the recovery of the Ukraine economy in terms of delivering lots of different types of building materials.
Okay, so what kind of engagement have you had with it? When you think about the future of Ukraine, you're making a bet on the future of Ukraine. What is your bet about the future of Ukraine?
So I think, and just to put it in context, I mean, the investment we will make will be in the order of 280 million euros, right? So it's a fairly significant investment. We've been working at it or on it since last September. We have a project team made of Ukrainian nationals, around legal and engineering and technical and whatever, working through the process. And it's progressing, I would say, quite well. To be honest, in terms of where we're at right now, and we look forward to doing that. And to answer your question, then the bet we're taking is really that the Ukraine of the future will be, in a post-war environment, will be European in outlook, Western in outlook. And what that means in terms of building materials is that, standards and rules and regulations will be European-based, for example, just as a very typical thing, where we know what they are, we know how they what they're made of, and Ukraine hopefully will turn that direction. That's the bet we're effectively taking, that they will go that way. I should say that we have had a presence, sales presence in Ukraine since 2006, and whatever the rules and norms and so on that are there, we work with them today. But for the future, we're taking that bet that it'll be a more European outlook.
You're betting it's going to be part of the European Union or part of the European community, and that just as the Deputy Minister was talking about, you're basically taking the bet, you're buying what the Ukraine is selling in terms of saying this is a real opportunity for you, not just in Ukraine but also regionally.
Exactly.
Okay. So could you tell, has it been easy to work with the Ukrainian government? I think it has been for you in terms of with the national government. Is that the case, Mike?
Yeah, I think in general, I mean, we've had a good relationship, particularly with Ukraine Invest, and through them with the government. There has been widespread support for what we want to do.
Yeah.
Widespread, help available. But I think probably the biggest challenge that we have found, which was probably a little bit more difficult than we had anticipated, was around access of land or serviced land, if I can put it like that. And that's why some of the comments that the Deputy Minister has just mentioned is very relevant in terms of the future.
So two things I wanted to ask you about. One is, one of the things you do is heating pipes. Could you talk about heating pipes? Because I think this is relevant to there's a larger point here about heating pipes.
Yeah, I mean, I think our general product range is focused on, decarbonizing the building construction sector, which is a huge challenge, not only in Ukraine but everywhere else. And one of the units we have is a unit. It's a Danish original origin company where we manufacture district heating pipework, effectively taking it from where the heating system is generated to the houses, homes and buildings and whatever, right? And if you look, a lot of progress has been made in lots of countries around decarbonising the electricity system, but little has been done on the heating. And therefore this is a fundamental part of having pipework that's properly insulated, etc. Now today, all the standards for district heating in Ukraine are old,
Soviet.
Ukrainian, Soviet, Russian based, right? Now, that's not going to stop us because it's needed, right? So it's not going to stop the project, but the project would be much more economically positive for us if they were based on EU standards, because then we could straight away from the same production process, the same production line, sell it into Ukraine or sell it into Poland, Slovakia, Germany, etc., etc. And that's the type of practical help that we will need, I think, going forward to make our project a success.
So if the government, if, for example, if you were sitting next to the Deputy Minister of the Economy and you said, wouldn't it be great, Deputy Minister, if we could change the pipe standard to make it fit the European Union one, is that your ministry?
Yeah.
Can you fix that? Can we work on that? Because it seems to me, like I said at the beginning, the biggest, deepest thought I've got is you've got to plug into the European Union. So it would strike me as like changing that regulation would be amazing, not only because you're going to rebuild and hopefully 10 years from now or less, you're going to be a member of the European Union. And then someone's going to say, well, you're not up to European Union code and you have to like pull all that stuff out of the ground. So wouldn't it make sense to kind of change that regulation right now?
It definitely does. It's not only us, actually. It's also the Ministry of Restoration, which is the former Ministry of Regional Development, because it's the mixture of construction norms.
Is this Mustafa Kayem?
No, well, he is Mustafa Nayem. He's the head of it's Kubrikov.
Okay.
Kubrikov.
Okay. So I'm going to be with him tomorrow. I'm going to ask him about this tomorrow in the panel. But so are you, the two of you, going to get together and work on this?
Yeah. So the construction norms and the technical regulations. So that's the mixture of the issue. Which the one is theirs, the other is ours.
Okay. But it sounds to me like this would be an obvious thing you guys could do. And maybe even announce on Thursday that you're changing. So I'm gonna put that in the to-do list. No, I can't say this. Okay, but I think it's anyway. So I think Deputy Minister, I'm on your team, but I would just say this is an obvious thing, and there are hundreds of things like heating pipes that are going to have to change, and for Ukraine to be a regional partner and to be a regional exporter, they're going to have to meet the European Union standard, not some legacy standard. So part of what government, and we have a great government in the Zelensky government. We have a great government. We have great leaders like the Deputy Minister. But these sorts of things that are sound like really wonky and stupid and boring and down in the weeds are really important to the future of Ukraine, right? So that's why I asked you to raise it, Mike, is that this is a really important issue for you to be able to see for the vision that the Deputy Minister was painting, that it's a regional hub for European Union. These sorts of things have to be dealt with as part of it. So I suspect by the next URC, this will be fixed, right, Deputy Minister? Okay.
Yeah.
Sorry, guys. So I'm going to hold you to that. I'm going to come back to you about it. But Mike, I want to ask you about something else. You've talked about your country, Ireland, benefited a lot from European Union accession. That's one of the reasons I've been pushing why it's so important, because you got lots of accession money and it plugged Ireland into the OECD. But one of the things that Ireland did is you had enterprise zones or sort of zones, industrial zones, and the Deputy Minister's talked about that. What would an industrial zone look like that would work well for companies like Kingspan in Ukraine?
Yeah, I think, I mean, one of the other practical things I think that could be done to make it easier for foreign investors, again, in a post-war environment, right, to come and locate. And I think there's lots of opportunities for relocation from Asia into Europe, and I think there's tremendous opportunities in the future. But I think having serviced industrial parks using special economic zones like they have in Poland and Ireland, where it's easier to bring people from outside to locate. I mean, today, and I have to say we're very happy in total with how it has gone. But if I was to look back and always kind of being critical of things that we can improve on, I think not having a location where you can take people and say, here's the power, here's the water, here's all the utilities.
Plug and play.
Plug and play to an extent, right? I think that's a huge thing that has to be done. And if I go back to when I growing up in Ireland, we were relatively poor, didn't have a lot of infrastructure. I'm not that old, but I do remember when we had no telephones, we had little cars and stuff like that. And we've now developed massively with a lot of help from a lot of people. But fundamental to it was FDI. Which came in, through our development agency, in terms of bringing, foreign investors in and providing a solution.
Okay.
And that's the biggest, I think, looking to the future that can be done.
So I want to do two slightly self-serving things. One is there's a study by the AmCham. Who's a member of AmCham Ukraine here? Okay. There's a fabulous study that came out on Friday about war insurance. And I don't know if there's a way, Arisia, for everyone to get the copy of that study. And then I couldn't keep straight all the different kinds of insurance. We had 3 different meetings on insurance as part of our 25 meetings. And at the end of them, I was like, I can't keep these all straight. I'm not in the insurance business, and most people in this room probably are in the insurance business. So Romina and Yanina, my colleagues, put together a really interesting report on kind of just putting in simple English, what the heck are the different kinds of insurance and what are we talking about? So I would strongly encourage people to look at the study that the AmCham Ukraine did on the need for insurance, different kinds of insurance. And then I would encourage people to look at the CSIS report on just like the explainer on what the heck this is, because it seems to me there's been a lot of talk, and you'll hear a lot of talk about insurance, but insurance means different things to different people. So Mike, if I said to you insurance, can you get insurance right now in Ukraine? And if so, where can you get that from?
Yeah, I mean, today the answer is yes.
Right.
With DFC and others, and we're in discussions and negotiations. We haven't actually, taken it up or engaged it because we don't, need it right now. I mean, it's going to be, if our plans go according to plan, let's say, we will start construction in 2024 and start manufacturing there for the first time towards the end of 2025. Okay, so but between now and then we will need it. But the answer to your question is today, yes, it's possible, and yes, it's possible to get that all types of insurance. And
Okay.
we see that.
Great, thank you very much. And I know the Deputy Minister had referenced some of this with MEGA and some of the things that others are doing. So there is some, but we still need more. I think we'd say that, right, Deputy Minister?
Yeah, we need the long-term solution now, obviously, because that the scale of the damage is devastating. You heard about the RDNA report, which is like $412 billion, and I think that the real damage is coming up to $1 trillion, which is really unprecedented amount the world has never seen. We were discussing this with Natalie yesterday, like the Marshall Plan. was far smaller, and whatever initiative for the recovery of any other disasters, natural disasters or human-made disasters, were far way smaller. Like the Indonesian fund was not more than 5 billion. This is 1 trillion. Like, look, and we're talking about the war risk insurance at the moment at like aggregately for a couple of billion, which is obviously not enough. So like we need to create some instrument that's gonna again deblock the private sector money, because the whole reconstruction without the private money is impossible. Like we cannot be relying on the public finance forever, but we need the public finance to stand behind this as a backstop. Like they need to be the first loss layer guarantor, and then the multiple should be growing exponentially. So today the multiple is going to be x2, tomorrow is going to be x3, day after tomorrow x5. The good example is actually what the UK government was set up once. It's called Pool Re, and then this was actually due to the conflict with Ireland, but still like the consequences were that they created this the pool, and then they invested up to 5 billion, and now it's like more than a couple of hundred billions, and getting to 500 billion because of this multiple, because of the leverage, and this is a great example to follow, and we need this longer term solution. It's obviously really demanded.
Thanks, Deputy Minister. Okay, Natalie, thanks for your patience. I've been anxious to bring you into this conversation. So you were an investor.
Nowhere else to go right now.
You're an investor. You're an investor. You've been an investor in Ukraine. You were finance minister in Ukraine. You, I think, are one of the most important voices on Ukraine's future. I think, and you're someone who I listen to, and many people listen to in Washington. You have a lot of moral authority. So, Natalie, when you look at this conversation, you think about what's needed. Are there some, when you think about what could the government of Ukraine be doing, but also what can, there's a lot of donors in this room. There are going to be donors at URC tomorrow. What should they be doing? And the deputy minister has talked about some of them. Mike has talked about some of them, but I know you'll have your own perspective on this.
Well, first of all, I don't think there's any single silver bullet. And I think you really need to start to differentiate the pool of potential investors. So to a large extent, when we talk about the AmCham survey, we're talking about investors who've already got skin in the game, money in the ground, and of course they're looking for insurance. When you take investors who have not made the decision, who've previously never been in Ukraine before, you're talking about a very different risk analysis. And the question, I think, for all of us, for the Ukrainian government, for donors, is to identify what is standing in the way of them being willing to come to Ukraine. They weren't willing before the war. And the war is a simple excuse. And it's true that the war increases risk perception, without a doubt. But there were other reasons. And so I think you kind of have to lay out the reasons, as the government's been doing, and try and attack each of them. Because with each effort that you make, you reduce the risk perception on the part of some part of investors, who each one has a different set of choices to make. They can invest here or there. They can invest now or later or never. They have a series of investment decisions to make. And so I think war insurance is important, but I would argue that the war insurance is only one small element. And when I look at Ukraine and I say, why is it an opportunity? What's the business case? What I think of is, why now? The question is, why now? Why are we talking about this now and not after the cessation of hostilities? We're talking about now. We're talking about it because investment in Ukraine requires time and preparation, especially if you've never been in this marketplace. And so by being an investor today, in a very complicated world, trying to find out where your best war insurance is, where your potential concessional financing is a layer of potential financing in a blended finance type of approach to investing in Ukraine, where is that available? Doing that amount of work with government entities is unique for most investors. Most investors don't operate in a world with governments. They operate in the private sector. So partly, you need to start looking at investing now, not because you're going to put dollars in the ground, but because for you to be ready to put dollars in the ground in 18 to 24 months, you need to start now, figuring it all out. It's complicated. And the Ukrainian government and Ukrainian investor are part of making it simpler. I am a free marketer, so I'm in favor of the whole country being a special economic zone, not any specific place. I think the entire territory of the country ought to be easy and possible for investment. And all of that requires, to a large extent, this EU discussion. So, if today I want to make an investment in the construction industry, I want to compete or be in another segment, and I'm thinking about it because I see the opportunity. I see this as the largest single platform for reconstruction in our lifetimes. Anywhere between 411, according to World Bank, to $1 trillion. And I want to be there because I want my product to be a part of that, whether it's cement or tiles or gypsum, whatever it is. Today, I cannot decide what to build because today I don't know when the Deputy Minister in the government of Ukraine is going to move to EU standards. If I want to be a construction company and I want to engage in massive amounts of construction possibilities, let's just take the schools. Are we going to build schools that meet the accessibility and phytosanitary standards of the EU, or are we going to build on today's regs? Two different sets of expertise I have to, as a private sector, develop. I either have to know the Ukrainian building regs and build by Ukrainian building regs, which are the law today, and I'm not suggesting anyone should do otherwise, or should I be planning for a reconstruction process that is going to be EU standard? Those are two different worlds. Today, it requires enormous training in Ukraine because you need architects to change the way they visualize projects, design projects, and you need to be able to develop these projects. To a large extent, the private sector is going to wait to see what the public sector is doing in this recovery. And to accelerate the public sector projects, you need to make these choices. In the United States, when you have a hurricane, so I lived through Puerto Rico, people have heard that, hurricanes, earthquakes, you name it, we had it, climate change related as well. You have categories of projects. You categorize them. For example, category A and B in the United States are life-threatening. You have to put the water back on because I just liberated a town and people need water. And I don't build according to EU standard. I build urgent today to get you water. Category C through G are permanent reconstruction. It's what I want to last for the next 50 to 100 years. Those, for example, should be EU standard, which costs more too. We all know that, right? The dollar doesn't go as far when you build to EU standards. But the fact of the matter is somebody in government has to be categorizing the projects, has to be saying, right now, putting the water on is category A. We're going to build it by today's standards. Everything else in terms of school buildings, in terms of housing, we're going to build by EU standards, and we're going to change all the regs immediately. So to a large extent, the government needs to be doing that. But let's go back to that private sector investor and his risk perception. The last thing the government needs to be focused on, and it's the hardest, and it's the one where Ukraine has been behind for 30 years, is judicial reform. To a large extent, this is about perception. I read a quote today that Mustafa gave this morning. We're in London. I usually use that. I say, I'm from Chicago, and I worked in Puerto Rico and Ukraine. Which corruption do you want to talk about? It's true. It's all true. But the fact of the matter is corruption is human nature. People try to do this if they can. What stops them? What stops them is a culture of non-participation. So you have that in some countries more than in others. But that culture was built based on consequences. When there are consequences for actions, and that comes from a judicial system. And with all due respect to the anti-corruption bureaus and agencies and prosecutor generals, that's kind of a separate parallel system. We still have an entire judicial system that has not yet been through reform. Now, I don't blame Ukraine, and I was part of the problem, let's call it, as being a government official, but EU accession is probably the answer. EU accession was likely the answer for many of the post-communist countries. And the quality of their accession process defines the quality of that judicial system. As you'll hear about some countries that maybe didn't do too well. Ukraine needs to get on that path today because the perception of corruption. I can give you 10 reasons why corruption's less today than it ever was in Ukraine over 30 years. I can give you 10 reasons why it'll be less going forward because of Ukrainian civil society than it ever was in the past 30 years. It's more positive than it could ever be. But you ask an institutional investor, a pension fund in the US, that we need to be investing in private equity, that we need to be investing in infrastructure funds, and they will tell you corruption. And it's not enough to say, well, they arrested this guy last week and put $3 million on a couch. That doesn't do it. We need judicial reform, and that is probably the single greatest impediment in my mind to massive private sector investment, because we know about the opportunity, the size, we know about the skill set of the people, we know about the incredible capabilities, commitment, the strength of this human labor force, and yet Intel just announced a facility in Wrocław, just over the border, to manufacture chips. What is it, 4 point something billion dollars. I wish they'd just gone a little farther east. But to do that, we need to change the perception. So no single bullet, lots of different answers, lots of work to do.
Okay, so Natalie, if you were the head of AID, or you were the head of the DFC, or you're the head of the EBRD, we've said there are a number of things our friends in Ukraine need to do, and we've got a great, we've got a capable government that is responding and is making change, and by the way, in the middle of a war, right? And do all this in the middle of a war. But if you were the EBRD or the DFC or AID, what would you be asking donors to be doing now, given sort of the conversation we've just been having? Is it about putting more chips on supporting Ukraine's judicial reform? Is it financial innovation around insurance? Is it fixing, helping at the border in terms of blockages at the border? What would you be putting additional people, time, and money on if you were those institutions?
Again, no single bullet. Big picture, I would say number one, someone needs to be doing civil service reform. We can't wait. Until government officials are being paid a normal salary, we're going to continue to have capacity challenges in government. So every time we come to this point, it happened when I was in government, everyone went, oh, we have a problem. And then they create a little thing on the side and they pay people well over here, but they're not part of government. And to have capacity in government to develop this recovery projects, we need to have civil service reform. So someone needs to be doing that. I'm not sure who's best qualified. We can talk about who's got more or less bureaucratic civil societies in the West. But that is one key thing that needs to be going on all the time. Judicial reform, same thing.
Yeah.
Can't stop. Start, do it now.
Yeah.
Ukraine has to do it. But the third thing is the skills training at the bottom. If this is a very decentralized country, which is something I'm very proud of, we did back in 2016 when we decentralized finance, and we then decentralized power, and we want to make sure communities are from the bottom up having kind of the ideas about how to rebuild and how to shape their destinies, then we need to have the skill sets down at the bottom. If you hear about projects, I'm not sure if the deputy minister's heard of it, but you hear about, for example, the Japanese government wants to rebuild 100 schools in Ukraine. Well, there aren't 100 school projects ready that are investable, with land, with approvals, with building regulations, building scope. Who is supposed to do that down in, you name it, in Bucha, in Irpin, in Marinka, wherever these schools need to be built? So part of it is helping create that skill set. There should be massive training right now. And then if we move to the EU standard, how do you train them to EU standard planning? And then the final thing I'll say is that they need to make it easier to access the capital for the private sector. These bureaucracies are a little bit too closed, and the private sector doesn't know how to participate.
So Natalie, just on that, there's been lots of discussion about impact investing and blended finance and risk sharing, whether it's across, and this was one of the meta questions for this panel. There's been discussions about insurance. There have been some initiatives, whether it's the Danish initiative or MEGA or EBRD or the DFC. What would you like to see? Let's call it development finance innovation. What would you like to see AID or the DFC or the EU that's got soft money? What would you like? Would you like them to see plussing up this insurance initiative? Where should they be putting kind of development finance dollars as part of unblocking FDI and developing Ukraine?
So over time, you've got to plus it up because it's too little for the overall. Yeah. But I think right now, blended finance and providing capital to SMEs in Ukraine. And I say that because SMEs are not only kind of the core of a democracy, we know that, but they're also absolutely necessary for the return of people home. And that return home is necessary to have a labor pool for the future. So it's all intertwined, but we need to have jobs, homes, and schools for people to come home to. And that requires SME. And the SME can't borrow at the current lending rates. So blended finance is one of those solutions. And I think the EBRD's done a project, I think they announced yesterday, on impact investment. People do individual things, but large-scale access to blended finance to lower-cost capital for SMEs in Ukraine,
Okay.
together with skills training.
Okay, so if you're AID and you're in this room, or you're the donor coordinator for the State Department, or you're with the European Union Aid Agency, or you're with JBIC or JICA, you've just got your homework assignment, right? I think that's what you just heard. And you can see why people listen to Natalie around the world. That was really great. Thank you, Natalie. So, okay, thank you. Okay. So, John, you've been investing in Ukraine for 6 years. You've invested something like $600 million in Ukraine over time. Tell us about what that experience has been like and what's happened since the war, and what are you hoping to see, whether it's from DFIs or aid agencies to, because you could be doing more. In theory, you could be doing more. And what are you hopeful about for the future of Ukraine?
Yeah, sure. First of all, I'd like to say thank you for putting me after Natalie, because it's perfect to follow Natalie after me.
Sorry, John.
That's okay. It's okay. It's a pleasure. Yeah, we've been active in the market for a long time. We invest in what I think globally would be considered SMEs, but they're, for Ukraine, larger companies probably. Yeah. Usually with assets, we invest in industrials, agriculture, transport, things like that. And I think we tend to, because I think the market has had a hard time, obviously, since the war started, we focus on stressed and distressed situations, turnaround situations, really. So Ukraine has a lot of those. And even today, it's not just that there's mismanagement in Ukraine, it's just that there's no access to capital. So, of course, many companies, if not all in some forms, need access to capital and expertise. So we've had our share of problems. I completely agree with Natalie that the core and most important absolute reform to continue is judicial reform. We've recently been enforcing on an asset. Unfortunately, the management team decided to use the war as a pretext to pilfer or steal 130 million of inventory, and so we decided to enforce, which was not an easy decision because obviously we recognize there's a war on. At the same time, they've had 22 attempts at injunctions, and the statistics in the judicial system are impressive. But I would say at the same time, there's a tremendous community of people in Ukraine who want to do the right thing, whether they be lawyers or civil society or advisors or even management teams inside these companies. So of course we've had difficult times. We were involved in acquiring Maria Agro Holding after there'd been 300 million of theft by the former owners to those things. But at the same time, we turned it around and sold it to the Saudis. And so I think that the key point about Ukraine from our perspective is that it is a market you can invest. It is a market where you can make great returns. And even today, I think it's an exciting market during the war, except that there is, to your point about confusing government incremental solutions that are being tried and tested, there's no obvious way for us as a fund to get a portfolio level war insurance, for example. And I think we have a portfolio of new projects that we'd like to invest in. We're working on launching a new fund. But when I go out and talk to pension funds, I had a call the other day with a pension fund in the U.S. who's giant. And the guy actually is Ukrainian, and he would love to invest, but he's super regulated. He's not able to invest during the wartime. And even with war insurance, it's probably not quite enough. He needs also political insurance, and it's difficult because each investor has their own angles. But my point, I think, is that so far the international community around this question has been very incremental. And I think we could say, frankly, arguably they've been incremental in every aspect of this war because, frankly, we should have been sending a lot more heavy weapons and air defense a year ago, right? So incrementalism is a problem everywhere. And in this case, if I were saying to policymakers, if I were suggesting one thing, I would create a $5 billion equity pool to invest in existing fund managers with track record in Ukraine. Because, of course, I'm talking my own book there, but frankly, with a change in the ability for us to know we can go and get some capital to then go back to our pension funds and explain to them that there's first loss or there's risk insurance or there's a cornerstone investment, it transforms those conversations, really. So I think there's a way for the G7 or the British government or the DFC to actually make a statement and say there is for investments during wartime, there is a pool of capital available to funds who can pass the EBRD's test for a track record. I mean, there's existing mechanisms. We don't need a new mechanism, a new fund set up, a new structure. They already exist. And we're ready to invest today. I think it's a question of getting some degree of support from governments and to connect our private sector, very private sector focus with a bit of government support. I think it would unlock a lot.
So, Deputy Minister, there's been a lot of things put on the table here. I wanted to give you a chance as representing the Ukrainian government to respond to some of the ideas that have been put on the table here today.
Well, I fully endorse what Natalie was saying about the support of the SMEs, and I think this is really important because they are the pillars of the economy, and we actually lack private equity funds investing in SMEs, and I think this is something that should emerge as the next stage. These funds should have more concessional capital by nature as the inflow as limited partnership to them, because smaller target returns should be applied to those, but it may be kind of bigger return and in the future perspective of the growing of this SME, because they can grow exponentially. In terms of like setting up the private equity fund, what John was referring to, that he's having issues with the pension funds, I think that at this point the issue could be regulated by the hurdle rate, because like now the risk does pay off a little higher rate, and so maybe this is the solution at the short-term way to do this. Speaking of the war risk insurance, the political risk insurance, it actually comes in a package. So like I think you need to kind of learn a little bit more from what is offered from DFIs. I'm not sure they're going to invest the limited partners investment into the fund, but they obviously going to ensure the target that your fund will be investing in, and so this will be de-risking the whole chain, and the capillarity of the funds will be flowing back with lower risk. So I think it just needs to more investigation and more work with this. You said that we don't need to set up anything new. I tend to disagree to some extent with you, because like we obviously have the great infrastructure of the IFIs, and they're very active, and they're extremely grateful for the support that they have. But sometimes the policies and the mandates that they have actually restrict them to be a little more aggressive, which we would like to see, and I think which is your approach, speaking about the turnaround situations and your experience here in Ukraine. You might have heard about the initiative of the president that the government is working together with BlackRock Financial Market Advisory Bank to set up Ukrainian Development Fund. Per se, this is like the first time in history Ukrainian DFI, if we could call it this way.
Like a KFW for Ukraine.
Yeah, it's like a KFW for Ukraine, but focused only on Ukraine, right? So it would not be investing and supporting any other countries. The composition will be more like EBRD, because we're targeting the international treaty where we're going to have Ukraine as one of the shareholders, and then we're inviting numerous other governments to join the treaty together with us. Ukraine's skin in the game will be envisaged by the seizure of those Russian assets that are still sitting on the accounts of the international governments. And then the fund will be performing the role of the minority equity anchor stakeholder investor, doing the underwriting of the deals, and then demonstrating with the willingness to invest that this particular project is worth considering. So BlackRock is not doing the management; they're just doing the advisory for the concept, for the blueprint. It's already there. There will be some announcements tomorrow in the conference. And we're moving to setting it up. So having this institution backed up by the concessional finance doing the minority investment of 10%, for instance, imagine they do 10%, another private equity fund does 10%, the project initiator does 10%, and then you deblock leverage of 70%, which is already looks more attractive having all these equity investors in it. So this is also the solution we try to find out, and this approach will actually be triggering like enormous multiples for the funds that we're getting from our partners. We want to make the best use of these money that we're getting, because we're getting enormous support. You know that the first we needed to bridge the budget deficit, then we are doing this rapid recovery and rebuilding, but then the economy rebuilding is next. But how do you do this? You need to be creative, you need to be more kind of sophisticated instruments should be put in play. And we want to make the highest value of the funds that we're getting, and that's where we're creating some kind of these institutions.
Okay, I know we need to move to Q&A. So this is remind folks who are on the record. I'd love to hear from. There's some interesting questions online, but I know this is a very thoughtful audience, so I'd welcome questions from the audience. I think we have microphones. Okay, let's see. My new friend from Denmark who's with the European Union, I want to hear from her. And then I want to hear from this woman back here with the beautiful black shirt. Oh, these two first, please. Yes.
Thank you very much. I'm always happy to have new friends. So it's a big pleasure. No, I just wanted to say thank you for the very, very interesting discussion and a lot of thoughts. Working at the moment on supporting exactly the right sequencing of alignment with EU legislation and sequencing of the investments going forward. I'm always incredibly happy to get new inputs and new thoughts to be able to provide the best possible support from the European Commission side to the Ukrainian authorities. I just wanted to also very briefly say that about 2 hours ago, so I could not mention it this morning, we adopted the European Commission's proposal for financial support for the next 4 years. Thank you. So it's a 4-year multi-annual proposal of 50 billion euros.
It's a lot of money.
It's not seen before, I think, in the European budget. So Ukraine is the only country in the world that has a directorate in the European Commission, and now they also have a budget without precedence. But we will make sure to make the most of it, and I do agree very much with the whole perspective of bringing it in alignment with the alignment with European, both the legislation, but also access to all European programs and markets. So I do think this is very important. But I also wanted just to flag that in the proposal there are 3 pillars. And whereas there is a pillar that's very much focusing on this financial support and the support to the reforms, there is also a second pillar that is a specific Ukraine investment framework that is designed exactly to also attract and facilitate private investors. This is not the only instrument that will, create a revolution tomorrow, but it's at least a step in the right direction. I will hope people will find it like that, at least. And together with other national or international donors, we're also trying very hard to see what more can be done in this area. But I also just wanted to highlight that another very important part is that we'll build a plan for the reform and investments together with the Ukrainian government. And in that one, we will also try to see how to factor in. It was the point on the sequencing also I loved very much this whole thing about what do we need to do right now? And we just need to do it. And what do we need to do at the top quality for going forward? And this is what I would love to build into the new plan. So any inspiration from that side is just brilliant. Thank you.
Thank you, Marlene. Thank you very much. This woman back here, please.
Hello, thanks a lot for your moderation. First of all, I forgot for this half of hour about war, about catastrophe in Kakhovka. Thanks a lot for you.
Tell us who you are, sorry.
I'm representative of Covenant of Mayors project in Ukraine, and we are working with municipalities in the field of climate change mitigation and adaptation project. And I have a question to Natalia and John related to investment attraction. When we speak about cooperation on the level of municipalities and international financial institutions, there is some ping pong between Ministry of Finance, municipalities, international financial institutions, and private investors. What will be your recommendation or national roadmap for removing barriers on the level of Ministry of Finance in the field of cooperation with international financial cooperation and municipalities?
Okay, so Great. All right. Thanks. And there's this gentleman here with the gray shirt. That's you with the blue tie. I don't know what to see.
Thank you. I'm Brian Milikovsky. I'm with USAID Economic Resilience Activity. There's a question and a little bit of background I'm going to have to give first. Should I give it after the
You
answer?
get extra credit for keeping it short, but I want to just say he did a fabulous report on the construction sector. Hold it up. Everyone's got to get a copy of this.
Yes.
Go and get this report.
So, 90% of the building materials needed for reconstruction by estimate of industrial experts we worked with could be manufactured in Ukraine. But so much of the potential gatekeeping for Ukrainian business participation in the reconstruction is going to be compliance with these new norms that we all want to see built into Building Back Better. Some Ukrainian factories are already exporting to the EU. They can do it. Many have not. This is usually part of an accession process that, other East European states have gone through. They get a lot of years to work on it in a structured way with the EU. But this all might be built in a very serious way to Ukraine's reconstruction. And this is tens or hundreds of billions of dollars and euros, much of which will be paid for with loans that Ukraine can either get into its own economy or might have to import. And I think we all appreciate which one of those is preferable for Ukraine, especially when it's got to repay those loans. So it's fantastic when new actors are coming in talking about these standards. There are hundreds of Ukrainian factories making building materials right now. We're working with some of them. They really want to know what are going to be the rules of the game, and they really need technical assistance to be able to comply with these new standards. What are the, so the question is, what can the donors, Ukrainian government, and finance do
so if
to
you're
activate
AID
them?
or you're the European Union and you're going to be helping provide contracts for rebuilding, perhaps you'd want to have something built into the contracts working with the Ukrainian government to ensure that Ukrainian manufacturing is kept in mind or is supported in some way, right?
And
for
the technical
example,
assistance they're going to need to catch up with those new norms, and maybe the investment they're going to need to do.
Right.
That.
Okay. Great.
Thanks so
Okay. Okay. So we've had several ideas. One is about this wonderful news about the European Union, this enormous once in a generation package from the European Union. We had a question.
Don't say once in a generation.
No, once in a generation.
First in our generation.
First in our generation.
Okay.
First in our generation. First in our generation. Okay. First in our generation. Something about how we work among municipalities, IFIs, the national government on reconstruction, and I think there's also an underlying theme of. Some of this is going to be about a cleaner, a cleaner economy, and obviously as well, and thinking about reliable, and I get that. And then a conversation about the enormous potential. Ukraine's economy is hands, manufacturing, brains, tech, and grains, right? Someone taught me that. Someone smarter than me taught me that. Hands, brains, and grains. And so Ukraine's going to be able to manufacture its own reconstruction, or has the potential to manufacture its own reconstruction. So I'd like the panelists to respond to any of the comments that have been put on the table. Let me start with you, Deputy Minister.
Well, maybe I'll start with the last one, like what technical assistance can be provided, because it's really important when we are talking about the SMEs like the broader range of the entrepreneurs, that they need to learn how to run business in the global way. So they need to understand that they're inevitably moving towards the global economic society. They no longer have a chance to go back to where they were before. And the majority of them, still do not know what the international financial standards are, like whether they need an audit, whether they need a transparent legal structure, but they obviously do. They need to do IFRS, they need to adopt new legal structures, they need to learn how to interact with the vendors that are expecting certain standards from them. If you want to export your goods to European vendors, you got to comply to the standards and norms. So that's where I would focus our attention. Teach them how to do this. Give them instruments how to transform. get the donors' support directed to get them finally do this Big 4, Big 10, Big 12 financial audits, right? Or they need to do this in order to get the access to the direct lending from institutions like IFC, EBRD, or DFC, or any others, or any ECA covered financing. So this is one thing. And this implies also into adopting the norms, and I think this work is already underway. The Ministry of Restoration, you know, the recent changes to the whole infrastructure of the construction control has been reloaded, and the corruption has finally been eliminated there. So this is a really great achievement that we're proud of as a government, and we keep moving this way. So, and then the technical regulation is the next one, because it's another thing that's been known for different levels of corruption, but they have no other chance to stand. Like they will be, the corruption will be eliminated there as well, and they will obviously be providing services. And we're moving to the alignment of the in conformity of the technical regulation standards with European Union. We're going to sign an agreement fairly soon. I hope. We had the missions. It's called ACA. And this ACA agreement will be signed hopefully at the beginning of next year, like mid of next year we're going to have it. And our technical regulation bodies will be in position to certify Ukrainian manufacturers, which will not have to go and apply for the laboratories in Europe. They can do it in-house in Ukraine. This will smooth the process, and this will give them the standards. They will say, we're now working on European standards. Go use it. Go take it back at home. You don't have to go to Poland or Baltics, and then just do this. So yeah.
Good.
Yeah.
Mike, what's your reaction?
Yeah, I think again to the last point. I mean, I think the more, first of all, the problem is much bigger in terms of reconstruction than any individual organisation or company or even suite of companies can do in the short term. So, but I do think though that as companies like ourselves, as we go there, right? You know, we have whatever 200 factories across the world. We'll bring the best practices there. By virtue of doing that, we will do two things. We will need a lot of local suppliers. And by the way, we will have all local people. That's the other, including the management. So by virtue of doing that, there'll be people who will have to come along with us, right? To the earlier point by the Deputy Minister, in terms of from a European point of view, there are standards, and we'll push that. But I think the other aspect is that local producers, right, in building materials and other areas, will, by virtue of seeing what we bring and others bring from an FDI point of view, they'll also raise their game as well. Now, they'll need some help, of course, as was discussed, but I think it's an absolutely exciting, brilliant opportunity to be able to upskill a whole generation of people and leaders in companies. And I think it's very exciting, to be honest.
Okay. Natalie?
I agree. The donors ought to be putting local content minimums, negotiating that with the Ukrainian government and making sure that this money is going to local. To do that, you've got to change your regs. Otherwise, you're not going to have local builders capable of building for an EBRD EU standard project. And they're going to say, you're lending us the money, and nobody can do it because the regulations aren't there. So you've got to marry local content rules with the regulatory system being in place. Otherwise, we're stuck with nothing. I would argue that I think it's critical for countries that have been through this process, like Poland, to be really on the ground helping to get that regulatory system changed, because they've been through that accession process. You know, for Americans, it's a little bit distant, to say the least. On the municipalities, look, I am a big believer in decentralization for a wide variety of reasons. I think we need to go back to that. During wartime, it's not been fully implemented, but it's a necessity to have an act. It is partly why Ukrainians have done so well in this war, to be perfectly honest, because we came into this war with a very decentralized governance system capable of responding at every level. And I mean, leadership from Kiev is critical, and it's been valuable, and there's no question we couldn't do it without President Zelensky and the team. But we have leadership, and we need leadership in every community. So I think, you know, how do IFIs respond? I think a lot has to do with municipalities' capacity to repay. Remember, most IFIs are doing this through loans, and so the question is, can you can you repay? And if not, will the state provide a guarantee? And is the state in a position to guarantee? And what does it require? If the state's going to guarantee the, quote, Dnipro metro system or the Kharkiv metro system or something like that. So I think there's no single answer for the IFIs. They're looking for a repaid project, and that means that you have to have a community that is capable of repaying. If you take a completely formerly occupied town, let's just take Kherson, which has not only been liberated but is being pounded daily by bombs, you cannot expect them to have credibility in terms of being able to repay in the near future. Their ability to generate tax resources is low. So we need to really focus grant funding on those communities that are not going to have the capacity to repay, and or minimal, because we already have a very high GDP debt to GDP ratio, minimal state guarantees over certain key prioritized projects. But I mean, I've been in conversations with civil society where they say they don't want Kyiv making those determinations. You know, it's a balance. You're not going to be able to do this without Kyiv, because Kyiv provides either state guarantees or is going to in some way help IFIs to determine what's a priority. So there's going to have to be some conversation. Although I know we want it to be completely decentralized, there's got to be a balance.
Okay, John?
I think I would reiterate my point that I made earlier. Oh, yeah, that's the I would make the point I made earlier, because actually, Deputy Minister, it wasn't that I was saying that your initiative to create a centralized investment unit wouldn't be a positive thing. I certainly think so. But in the meantime, between now and when the war is over, and we all hope it's December or September, but we don't know when that is. We, for example, are preparing to and are ready to make investments today. And I think actually we can work together on that, because there will be a time in the future when your services and the new entity's services will be very helpful to us, I think, for example. in underwriting guarantees to municipalities when that time comes. But in the meantime, I think the international community could catalyze tremendous amounts of FDI today from private sector funds by creating a pool of equity capital to invest in those funds, to unlock other capital to invest in it. So I think the things we're talking about are hand in glove. And that applies to the construction sector, where we've seen lots of deals that are really interesting. And there are companies that need funding today, and we'll do our own due diligence. We of course would be happy to have a third party give us their view on it in the future, but we'll do our own due diligence anyway and make investments. So I think there's an opportunity which is complementary to the strategy that you guys are taking as well.
Let me get a couple more from the audience. So this gentleman here and this woman back there in the black shirt. So this gentleman and this woman here. And then I'm going to read a question before they go answer these. I'm going to ask these. There's Andra Lucia Martinescu. I'm waiting to cross the border from Romania into Ukraine, and I'm seeing single-lane roads and endless queues of HGVs. I don't know what HGVs are. Someone can tell me what that is. Right. Okay, so waiting to board one overloaded ferry. Both sides are congested, and the waiting time is extended for days. So before I engage in broader conversations, I'd like to point to a more practical issue. Severely underdeveloped cross-border infrastructure represents a geopolitical vulnerability, unfortunately a lack of political will across the board. So obviously if you were at the border and you were frustrated, you would probably write it just that way too. So thank you, Andra Lucia. So I get it. So I think we'll want to talk about this issue of kind of waiting times at the border, interconnectivity with the European Union, physical connectivity. We're going to have a panel at that I'm moderating on Thursday talking about transport and logistics, and we did a paper on transport and logistics. And so there has to be kind of a rethink of the infrastructure as part of joining the European Union. So now this gentleman here, your question or comment, sir. And if you could say who you are.
Yeah, Jaresko, I'm a managing director at Lazard. The investment bank have been active in Ukraine for 8 years. Had the pleasure of having Natalie as a client. And you as well. So thank you. It's a great panel. Just one thought and then another idea. The thought is that indeed, and I've been also 10 years in government myself, when it comes to FDI, let's face it, Ukraine, in order to get the chip factory that Natalie was talking about, will be competing with Wrocław and all the other big cities. And then we're talking hundreds of millions and billions of subsidies that actually those governments and those cities are putting down. So could be an idea, but realistically, for anything that is tech or to a lesser degree manufacturing, that will require a lot of effort. And having one automotive factory for my country after 10 years of efforts, we needed to give half of the investment paid half of the investment to the investor. So that will come at a cost. Hence, one idea in the meantime, which might not be the most popular, but strikes me as a very big low-hanging fruit, and it's natural gas. So there's a country called Germany that is desperately trying to find for 3 billion euro worth of natural gas every month. There's another country called Italy trying to find the same goods for a value of about €1 billion a month. Right now, they're trying to find natural gas in the States and Qatar, but that tends to be 4 to 5 times more expensive what they used to buy to the Russians. Algeria, Azerbaijan, even Norway, lots of capacity constraints, need to explore more. Ukraine, so it happens, has all the pipes, has all the storage, from the previous times, and actually has a lot of wells that do produce but need investment. And so it strikes me that 45 billion euro of exports a year, giving the starting position, looks like a very interesting first port of call. And thanks to German and other people's lobbying, natural gas is green enough for the EU, at least for the next 30 years. And so if I were in the shoes of the Ukrainian government, that for sure I'll be focusing, because on top of the money, imagine then Germany and Italy depending on Ukrainian gas. I think it's a good position.
Best comment of the whole conference. Thank you. Yes, 100% agree with that. This woman here, please.
Yeah, thank you very much. My name is Irene Lucius. I'm representing WWF, Central and Eastern Europe. I'm very happy that so far nobody has mentioned environmental regulation as being an obstacle to investment, so that's great. It actually can become, in our experience, if there are two factors in place. The first one is that administration doesn't have the capacity to manage projects according to standards. We already talked about this. This is also very good. The other reason, quite often, is there is a lack of information and data. So lack of knowledge, where's the protected area, where are the water resources that need to be protected, how can forests in this place be used sustainably or not. So my question is, have you encountered these obstacles? And is there also a plan to actually come up with this database that enables sustainable investments and does not, therefore, make lack of data a blockage? Thanks.
Okay. So environmental regulations in the context of reconstruction, gas and the role of Ukraine in gas. How do we think about greater physical connectivity at the border with the European Union as it joins the European Union, and how do we deal with some of the holdups? So, Deputy Minister, anything you want to respond to, please?
Well, obviously the gas issue is a low-hanging fruit, as you properly defined this, and you know that we have huge gas deposits, and of course the majority of them are in the eastern Ukraine. There are some in the Black Sea, but there are really big deposits in the Carpathians in the western Ukraine. Majority of the gas is non-conventional, so it does require slightly non-traditional explorations with a horizontal drilling that can be done by only 2 companies in the world, and like one of them is Fleury and the other one is Halliburton, and I know that our national gas company, Naftogaz, already running negotiations with them, and that's where actually both of these companies are American by nature, well by law, because one of them is listed on the New York Stock Exchange and the other one's registered in US. Know that the US Exim financing may become available to actually do this. The issue with the gas, and you know this as the investment banker, is that it is carbon neutral. It is like relatively green to the European Union, but the majority of the financing institutions still treat it as the fossil fuels for some reasons. And you know that the ban and restrictions for the financing of the fossil fuels doesn't make any sense in the gas to me as well. I fully agree with you. Like, let's like forget about
Deputy
oil.
Minister, so there's a homework. If you're EBRD in the room, or you're an ECA in the room, or you're a DFI, you're one of the alphabet soup DFIs, and you're not willing to finance gas, shame on you. You should absolutely be doing it in this context. In the context of Ukraine, you absolutely have to do this. It's bullshit, I think is the technical term. Excuse my Ukrainian. But it's ridiculous that we're holding up the development of gas in the country of Ukraine, given the stakes. And so if you're a DFI, if you're an ECA, you're the EBRD or the World Bank, I 100% subscribe to what the Deputy Minister has said. And there are many agencies that are in this room or are going to be there tomorrow that need to take a good look in the mirror and ask themselves why they need to have a waiver. There are abilities to get waivers. They should get waivers right now. So I 100% agree with you, Deputy Minister.
This is the case. We have another company, national company, Ukernafta, that was recently took over by the government. And actually, we're revisiting the product distribution agreements that were controlled by the previous owners. We won't tell this name out loud, like in the Harry Potter movie. So, but revisiting all those and actually making them work in a better perspective. I know that the guys from Ukernafta had also roadshow to US. They're currently here in London. They're exploring different ways, attracting different financing solutions. Again, US Exim will be supporting some of those. We are enhancing the drilling, and this is really great point, and we're focusing on this one with all the transportation.
I want to disagree with Božidar on the intel. I want to look at it from a different perspective. There's no question that investments like that require subsidies, and Ukraine's not in a position to provide them. But when we talk about all of these different donors, why don't we get that same G19 each?
What's a G19?
Well, we've got the G20, but minus maybe one or two. He coined that phrase. I use it from him. But why doesn't every one of that G20, G19, G40, whatever, every country that's going to put some money aside for Ukraine, create that subsidy for one of their national champions to come in and invest in Ukraine? So it's a blended finance project, basically. It's just not, the subsidy's not coming out of Ukraine's budget, it's coming out of the donors' project. So let the United States say, we're going to do one, UK is going to do one, Germany's going to do one. Each one of them does one. To be honest with you, for 30 years, I've been telling Ukraine, if we had a major investor from each of these countries, 5 major investors from each of these countries, strategics, think about how different Ukraine would have developed and how different this alliance would have been before this war began 10 years ago, not a year ago, 10 years ago. So we can do it. We just need to think about it slightly differently.
So Natalie, can I ask you about the environmental regulations? What could you just speak to that, please?
No. Look, I'm all for mapping everything in Ukraine, having a technological database. It's all possible. We know that there have been massive problems with the mining of amber in Ukraine, with forestry in Ukraine. It's been the subject of multilateral debate and conditionality. There's a lot of work to be done. It can be done. It's just we're at war, and I assume that the answer is going to be there's a long list, but it needs to be done in order to
join the EU.
To sustainably use the resources of the country.
Yeah, Mike, do you want to comment on that?
Yeah, I think in terms of the question, in terms of the practicality, we're still a little bit too early in the approval process to have encountered any potential environmental things, right? But we have a lot of experience of environmental assessments in lots of other countries across Eastern Europe. So, we know and we support. And I just want to add that the manufacturing campus that we're going to put in place, we're going to have lots of solar and lots of wind generation. Not that we may do directly, but in cooperation with partners locally, right? As a way of having as low a carbon campus as possible, which I think can be an exemplar for what Ukraine of the future can be like, right? And I think the environmental database, not aware of it, but I think it's an excellent idea, because anything that makes it, again, easier for people to see what's where and when, it has to be commended.
John, do you want to comment on any things that have been put on the table here?
I would just say, environmentally speaking, any serious investor today has a focus on environment and what they do and what they invest in. And from certain jurisdictions, if you don't, you have unlimited liability as well. So you have to think about that. So clearly, if such a database were to be created, then it would be fantastic. And as to the bottlenecks at the border, there's a lot of them.
Yeah, I was thinking about my friend at the border who we haven't covered yet.
As to the bottlenecks at the border, we've experienced them in different ways through, our investment in Odessa last year, trying to get product out of the country when the port was closed. There is a tremendous amount that can be invested along the border with Romania, along the border with Moldova, and also in Poland. So I think there's some great investment opportunities to make the integration more significant.
Mike, could you just talk about this infrastructure issue? Because you must move stuff across the border, have envisioned that. What's your reaction to this?
Yeah, I mean, there are challenges at the borders, and typically most of our stuff would cross from Poland,
okay,
right? Even though we're doing more and more from Romania. So it is a challenge, right? But it's also a challenge coming back into Poland, and from an export point of view, and it's on the on the Polish side in terms of customs and stuff like that. So it is a challenge, and I think whatever the government can do to both on the EU side and the Ukraine side to make it easier and better and more efficient would be welcomed. I think on the road infrastructure, I just think again it's a tremendous opportunity, and I think post-war. I have a strong view that when, with all the money and the donor money and everything else that's going to be available, I think people living in the various villages and towns and localities will want to see some dramatic improvements, right? Whether that's in roads, railways, new buses, whatever, right? Airport, you name it. Like people, after a couple of years, have to see to continue to believe, I think, that this level of real, genuine investment in infrastructure is yielding something. So I think it's an issue, but I think it's a huge opportunity for the future.
Okay, so I'm going to ask each of the panelists to think about this. I'm going to call on one, or try and get one more person, but I want each of you to think about what's the one thing you want this group to take away from either your comments or from this conversation. So something short, so that I was told, say what you're going to say, then say it again, right, when you write a paper. So I think we want to just repeat, what's the takeaway message you want each of these folks to take away from the conversation, okay? So I'm going to get this gentleman with the V sign there. So with the cool, yeah. So we'll go with this gentleman.
Yes, thank you.
Yeah, use your big room voice.
I'll use my big room voice. I'm Michael Shaw, and I'm probably one of the only Canadians in the room with the Peace Coalition, and I want to ask kind of what Mike...
There are a couple of Canadians in here.
There's a couple more.
Three.
Yes.
I've got at least.
Well, there we
Where are
go.
the Canadians in the room? Are there Canadians in the room? There you go.
Oh my God.
Yeah.
Isn't there a hockey? There's a hockey team
We
here.
got a hockey team
Hockey
here.
team
That's
here. I kind of want to ask something that seems like maybe addressing the elephant in the room. We're talking about private equity investment. We're talking about loans for redevelopment and all this other kind of stuff. But Russia did all this damage. So what do we do to kind of blend a private equity investment scheme with a reparations policy against the Russian Federation? That's something that we've been working on with the government of Canada, and we're probably about a month away from this announcement too. So I just wanted to know what everybody here thinks about how do you involve Russian reparations? Because they wrecked everything. They should be paying for it.
So Russian reparations. Who wants to take that on?
Well, maybe I
Why don't you, Deputy Minister? Yeah. They have a plan. It's Deputy Minister.
Well, actually, I want to admit that the Canadian government is really progressive in this. They were among the first ones to adopt a special law, because it's really difficult when you're talking about the quasi-private property, right? And that's what the Russian assets are perceived as. And
the central bank assets.
Well, the central bank assets and also the private assets, the oligarchs, exactly. Like so Canada has adopted
the giant log cabin mansion in Winnipeg or something, right?
So we encourage all the other governments to do this sooner than later, because I can give you a number of reasons. First, this simplifies their lives, because they need to, they are supporting us, and they will no longer have to distract it from their own budgets and from their own taxpayers, but rather use what they already have under their umbrella. The other reason is that having all those luxury assets, or I'm not talking about the funds or the securities sitting on the special accounts. This is easy, but all those properties, yachts, etc. They need to be serviced. They need to be maintained. Like what the heck? Or why would you spend your taxpayers' money to maintain?
Fixing up the
exactly.
oligarch yacht that's been confiscated.
Yeah,
Can you imagine?
just get rid of it right now.
There are all these British newspapers that are skeptical of foreign aid to begin with. They'd have a field day saying, taxpayer dollars used to maintain the Russian oligarch yacht.
Exactly. Yeah.
Just
so
think
this
about
doesn't
it.
make any sense to me. So the sooner they start doing, the better, right? And so, the answer is obvious. Like you just got to do this.
There's been a lot of discussion about central bank assets, which is there's this funny stuff about, well, how do you sell the yacht, and do you pay for the maintenance, the rent on the penthouse, and with foreign aid dollars, no one wants to do that, or give the yacht to the EBRD and they can sell it at some point. And so, think about all the crap that you'd have to do, right? So there's a lot of headache that goes into the right.
There's a long due process in most of our countries.
Yeah.
For taking away someone's private property. So the other part of the oligarch assets is it's going to take, in many countries, in the United States, the litigation will go on for
we grab the yacht in Miami, and then it takes 5 years, and so it's sitting in who's paying for the docking fees and all that stuff. Just imagine but there's a separate category, which is the central bank assets. And so we're kind of moving towards a little bit more of a consensus about that. So I think you're putting your finger on an important thing. So so there are some G7 members that say, man, I don't know if we want to do that because it's going to open up a Pandora's box of problems, and somebody's going to come after us someday and grab our central bank assets. What do you say to that, Deputy Minister?
Well, they were reluctant to treat Putin as aggressor a couple of years ago, right? So
things are moving fast. Yeah, we're moving in the right. That's changing.
They need to adopt the new paradigm. Like there is no longer business as usual. So there is no longer way back to the old paradigm. Like they need to be more decisive.
Okay, so let me just. I was told I had. Go ahead, Natalie.
There's a foreign affairs piece by Professor Jaresko, Larry Summers, and Bob Zoellick. So it's bipartisan from a U.S. perspective, Democrat and Republican. And under U.S. law, they can walk you through how we don't even need incremental legislation. The legislation exists. You don't actually confiscate and take ownership of these assets. You simply transfer them to a UN trust fund like we did with Iraqi monies for Kuwait after the war to be used for Ukraine. In that way, the U.S. government never takes possession. You never take ownership. You're taking it from here to there. Now, the critical thing about these 300 is that, once again, Brussels becomes critically important because the lion's share, over 200 apparently, of the 300 is in Belgium. And so this is a great piece. It outlines it, but it's under U.S. law. We need to find in Brussels and other places the same set of ways to accomplish this. Do you not need domestic legislation to make it happen? But there's no question there is an International Court of Justice and there are UN resolutions that clearly establish the legality for utilization of Russian state assets, central bank, for the purposes of, call it reparations or reimbursement or repayment of damage.
Okay, so everyone gets 30 seconds. I'm just going to, at the end of this, we're going to have a break in the Neil Malcolm room, and then there's a Rebuilding Ukraine from the Ground Up, which will start in 30 minutes afterwards. But I want each of the panels, starting with John, going to the Deputy Minister. What's your take? We want people to take away from this session, please. Brief.
My brief is I think we need to stop the incrementalism in general, and I think we need to stop it also in the case of in unblocking FDI, and as I said, in my view is to create a pool of capital for existing investors to aggressively get involved in the economy. So stop incrementalism is my view.
Natalie?
Invest now. And what I mean by invest now, because I'm speaking to the private sector, is prepare. Do your due diligence, figure out who your partners are, figure out what you need, identify where the resources are. Start today.
Okay, Mike?
Ukraine is open for business from our point of view. We're very committed to the project, to implement and to be ready to build and execute on it over the next 18 months and look forward to the opportunity.
Okay, Deputy Minister.
Can I endorse on all of this?
You agree with all that? Okay. And you're going to fix the heating pipe regulation.
Yes, and the final thing. And the final thing, just to wrap it up, like Ukrainian government is there to help, like, right? So we are different now. So if before you would have asked the business, the government would ask the business, what do you need from us? They would say, just don't interfere.
yeah.
But now they need our assistance, and we're there to help, and we're there to help you and the international community investors. Please refer to us, apply to us. We're open through the channels, and we want to do all this.
So before I ask you to thank the panelists, I want you to thank Aricia and Team Chatham House for all the great job they've done. Okay, now thank the panelists.